As artificial intelligence rapidly reshapes the workplace, organizations are facing a new challenge: how to prioritize and develop the uniquely human capacities that machines can't replicate.
I'm Micah Scalen.
And I'm Noah Scalen.
We are business partners, siblings, and we've spent the past decade helping leaders build the creative capacity they need to thrive. Now we've gathered experts at the intersection of art and science to explore this rapidly changing landscape.
It's time to unlock the full potential of human creativity as a strategic advantage in the age of AI. Welcome to the ROI of Creativity.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We have our special expert guest today, Michael Tennant. He's the founder and CEO of Curiosity Lab, a purpose-driven studio and consultancy that builds products like these cool card decks that I have and experiences that teach empathy. This is the Actually Curious card game that I'm holding. He's also the author of The Power of Empathy, a 30-day path to personal growth and social change, as well as Abundance, a guided journal for living a full life. Michael and his work have been featured by New York Times. Beyoncé recommended him, as well as the Today Show, Good Morning America, kind of everywhere. And he even received investment from Pharrell's Black Ambition Prize in 2022. Please welcome Michael Tennant.
Thank you for having me.
You talk about miracles in the book, and I really liked what you had to say about it. What you said about it was that miracles are plentiful and available to us all. And I think that, the fact that people don't think that is the issue, right? That people don't believe that that's the case. And not miracles in like the religious sense.
Yeah, it's a choice to expand our definition of miracles, expand our opportunities to see them, even as simple as nature around us or waking up in the morning and surrendering that will happen at night. So I think it's a practice in reorienting ourselves towards what's possible.
Yeah, I love that. Recognizing, I was thinking of it as sort of, it's recognizing the improbability of it all, right? That we're all here together today. How improbable is that? The chances that all of us would be here, would know each other, everybody would show up. Michael, you talk about that, we have to start by knowing what brings us joy and actively pursuing those things daily so that we have more of a sense of abundance, and that relieves a little bit of that tension. Can you talk about how you started to think about this? A lot of backstory to your work, but as a way of giving people a bit of a doorway in, where did this thinking come from? Because it's very different, this different approach to competitiveness being something that was kind of getting in the way.
They're two origins that stick out, but they're both kind of jumping right in. But I'll say the earliest one, chronology wise, would be, I would say, around 2016. I'm in Costa Rica. I'm just seeing a lot more simple living, and I'm starting to connect the dots between different models that I've experienced through literature and history that just weren't so driven on capitalism and growth and profit overall. And I start to kind of build my own little sort of, I guess, socialist ideas in my head, at least in terms of seeing more, I guess, basic needs met across the board and distribution of sustainable living and wealth. And then I would say big part of my story transitioning from being a storyteller, a marketer, partnerships executive into being an empathy thought leader was navigating the loss of two of my older brothers and needing to find something. I think so much of my happiness, which I had no real mapping, just sort of moved around with no clear direction, but so much of it was tied to my relationship with my brothers, which is funny. I knew the siblings theme was going to come back over and over. When I lost my first older brother, who was my closest sibling, I needed to grab every tool I dabbled with throughout my life to figure out how to survive. And one of them was values and purpose, and having the discipline of being able to really build inner knowing, build my anchor from the inside out. So yeah, I think when you're orienting towards that sort of self-discovery that allows you to be almost bulletproof to the outside world, because you know those things that light you up, you know how to refill your cup, you know exactly what pivots, or at least how to reinvestigate and arrive at the pivots necessary to get back onto your purpose. It's a really powerful tool, and it's really saved me and kept me whole, and it's why I've have included it instead of these aspects that divide or keep us reliant on uh, external validation.
Yeah, I'm going to say the story because I feel like after reading your book, it is a 30-day journal and it actually has like really wonderful activities and prompts for writing and reflection. But it really is a story, as you said. You're coming from that background, but really a very deeply personal story, rooted in a lot of loss and challenges, personal, but also like you don't shy away, as we know from this conversation already, from like addressing the societal things that are going on and how that really impacts our own identities and our own like suffering truly through some of this. So it's a really, really powerful book. But that change in the story where you're kind of in the story, you're continually looking for ways to change your perspective. And really, I thought about like you coming from a place of like putting a lot of pressure on yourself to be competitive and show up in a lot of ways. And we find that people lose their curiosity when they do that. Can you speak to that? Like how people, like what stops them from being open to that usually?
There's sorry, I have two ideas that are like wrestling in my mind. I think directly to your question is somewhere along this journey, I realized that I was finding more softness in positions of conflict. Now, I think it's worth also mentioning that way before I even wrote the book, maybe a year and a half before I lost my brothers, I created a conversation game called Actually Curious. I know you mentioned it up front. And essentially it's a game. It has 4 levels in it. We created it through the lens of values. So it's good for you to hear this too. Through the lens of shared values that we investigated as a team for Curiosity Lab. And 3 that have always survived are community, connection, and empathy. And we didn't want to just talk about empathy. We wanted to support people in creating the conditions to lower their ego and hear the other side. So we created a game with 4 levels that allows you to gamify turning off the fight switch, at least the debate switch, and really strengthening that muscle of listening to other people and listening to yourself, seeing where your judgments, where your preconceived notions come up. And when I created the game, honestly, I didn't really enjoy the game. Part of the reason why we created something that was like gamified, I was tapping that part of me that was a gamer, that part of me that didn't enjoy difficult conversations or vulnerable conversations at all, embodying that, being gentle with that, and then coming up with ways to trick that person into getting better at these conversations, right? So even some natural sort of empathy skills there, but not the empathy skills that I think a lot of people associate with, like being able to hold deep space for people as they're sharing their troubling stories. That wasn't there yet, or even the vulnerability to want to model that and show that to people. So when I lost my brothers and was able to use the foundations between playing this game and having a hard time with it to practicing meditation and being able to witness emotions progressively, witness the mind running progressively, witness my physiological, getting into somatic experiencing, which is a big part of the book, and getting this almost like self-guided analysis tool that is from the body up. And all of these things came together to save me. And why that's important is now, as I, in the pandemic, ended up back with my parents. We're in different places in our healing, different places in our self-awareness journey, different places in our anger management. And I was able to understand. I could witness my own journey in getting more distance between the hurt and the reaction, that I could understand theirs. And when the pandemic hit and the racial uprising hit, I was able to almost witness the rage and how that was coming out in all of these creative and really passion generating ways, and understand it and almost like look at it through the lens of emotions, through the lens of empathy. So I think it took for me having great loss to go down a rapid path of expanding my self-awareness, my own willingness to use myself as a guinea pig, and then be able to apply what I learned to understanding others. And I mean, I hope that I'm trying to remember the original question, but I just wanted to explain like the journey that I went on that would even allow me to see my own biases and would allow me to see nuances that my emotions would have otherwise blocked.
Yeah, you had already been developing some of these ideas and challenging yourself and making yourself recognizing that for the work you did, that like making that curiosity was really important and it made people uncomfortable. It made you uncomfortable to ask some of these difficult questions. So you were already like on a journey exploring that, but then the sudden impact of all these changes, it allowed you to like, I think, resurface all these things, right? And really use them
Yeah.
in really amazing ways. And you're a creative professional, and you understand the connection between creativity and empathy. And there's a part where you say that you had compassion for the risky side of your curiosity in the book. That part was so interesting to me because I like had not thought of it that way, but that we're always talking about creativity requires a certain amount of risk. And that's really hard for people because that risk, sometimes it's internalized, something imagined. Sometimes it's very real, right? Risk that could impact you in different ways. Whatever it is, you feeling it. I hadn't really thought about that, having compassion for like when you have a natural curiosity or a creative instinct, like having compassion for it and having compassion for the risk that puts you in. What for you,
Yeah, I
like,
think in
does that, because I was looking for that. Well, there's so much, to me, there's so many connections between creativity and empathy. And that's what, like, where I zeroed in on it the most in your book. But for you, where does that overlap?
I think in some people risk is easy, right? Depending on the type of risks. For some, taking a creative risk is easy. In preparation for this talk, I was thinking about a friend of mine. He is a finance professional. It's been really nice to witness him evolving in his own thought leadership in the written form, and then experimenting with other mediums as well. There was a time where he, just tried to consult me on how to be creative. He was almost looking for like a play-by-play instruction, and I realized that no one had ever asked me that question before. I'd never been I've never been asked to teach or explain that which comes easy for me. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of having compassion for the creative side or the risk loving, I can't even remember the phrasing, because today I almost kind of like cling to that as an anchor of, that's what I'm great at. I'm almost like applying the same risk lovingness, or even in many ways, the power of empathy, the 5 phases of empathy that I teach in it is meant to actually be a playbook that shows people how to use emotions to lead to creativity. But these days, I've been applying it towards parts of my business that maybe I've like clung to creativity. I've clung to being able to create all these models for teaching and different products instead of leaning into business development, or being able to see that there might have been a block in terms of like my narrative around myself as a salesperson and the importance of that, or even as an operational leader. These days, I block out every Monday just to do bookkeeping. And in the past, like I literally would have like a cognitive meltdown to allocate that too early in the week versus later. I think that the beauty of the 5 phases of empathy is it was me meaning to pay my healing forward. In some ways, it was an escape, in the sense to try to like processize my healing journey, and make it something that's accessible to people. But these days, I've been using it as a creative navigator. What does it look like to teach people how to feel into a strategy or feel into a creative idea, and how to then activate that within a network or a community?
I love that as a pathway in with your clients. So like, you bring this 5 phases of empathy into businesses. It's wild, and similar to Noah and I bringing in creativity into businesses where it's not the norm, right? It's not expected. And for sure, like the 5 phases process, I love it. And I love the idea of, in the book, it's a very personal development, but you move a little more than halfway through into like, how does this impact outside of the personal development space, which I love. And I know that was the point of the book, really. And, you're bringing this into businesses. What is that like, talking to businesses about this? Are they resistant? What is the key that unlocks the door for them when you're talking about it? And what's the
Mm.
impact for them?
It's been a continuous learning journey for me. The landscape for empathy, the hot button that it solves, and the majority of conversations has shifted. And mind you, and I think this is a really beautiful reflection for me, it gives me a lot of strength, is 5 years ago, I was strictly solving communications problems for other people, for brands. Today, I have 5 different pieces of IP in addition to having been able to use these artifacts, these tools, these tangible creative tools like the book and the games. But I've been able to bring them to the biggest stages in the country, like NASA, the State Department, most recently Comcast, Chanel. If we just talk about today, and if it's relevant, if we meander there, we'll talk about the past. But today, what's really been resonating with folks is when I talk about almost the makeup of an innovator. I see Gary in the chat writes, for some people, risks aren't even risks at all, but for others, risks are catastrophic. Just depends on what side of the Venn diagram you're on. And I love that. And I'll say that, like, it also depends on the situation. I just followed a really nerve-wracking investment conversation where I left my nervous system thinking this could be a scam. And also, at the same time, wanting to mine every aspect of the conversation, the interactions that led to it for what I could learn, what my fear might be blocking. The gentleman somewhere, I used one of my, I guess it's a device I have now. I asked him a curious question in order to kind of get some space back. Because honestly, listening to my nervous system, I didn't feel comfortable. But I asked him what was a book that he always recommends. What is a lifelong book that he always recommends? And one of them was The First Tycoon. It's about Cornelius Vanderbilt. Sorry to go all down that journey, but I'm pretty sure Cornelius Vanderbilt had a hard time taking the risk of being vulnerable with his kids, as he was also trying to hold space for this massive vision of passing down this massive legacy, which was really easy for him to go into battle wherever necessary to extend this empire. So anyway, I just think it's interesting that people can be really risk averse in certain parts, really important parts of their lives, and not even know it. So yeah, I think the aspect of the mindset of an innovator is that in order to innovate, you as an individual have to be creating, imagining solutions, imagining worlds, imagining outcomes that have never been done before, never executed before. They exist only in the abstract until you bring it to life. But maybe even with so much conviction inside of you that it's not even in the abstract. It is absolutely real in your mind until you manifest it into real life. And that takes a certain type of emotional build, at least one that leans really well towards the thing that you're creating. But then it also takes the ability to imbue that into others, because massive change takes community. I think that the door in these days has been talking to people about the emotional makeup of innovation, what it looks like to innovate as a team, what it looks like to fail forward. I just went and spoke at a school about unity, and I talk about the emotional makeup of staying in the conversation, of surrendering, changing someone, wanting to help someone, but knowing that you might not always be able to, because it actually takes that kind of bravery to try to make a leap. And I think those are also the types of miracles that I'm talking about. Is that if you can dream of something that other people would be afraid of and be strong enough of will to bring it into being, then that's a miracle. You're a miracle maker.
Thank you for that. I'm going to follow through on this risk thing, because it occurred to me that, like, connecting that empathy piece is like, if you invert the risk thing, when you look at some people, as was brought up, in certain circumstances, something can be really risky for one person and not a risk for the other. That means the other person is, if you think about what it looks like when you're doing something that's risky and for yourself, but another person might not realize that that's very risky for you, and that you're having this like intense, like emotional experience to take this risk and put yourself out there, right, and do this thing. And for someone else, they don't recognize that, right? And so that can be an interesting, like, another point of tension. And the same way, like, where you can bring your empathy is to recognize, where are other people taking risks that you don't recognize until you see that, like, oh yeah, they really put themselves out there, instead of seeing them as chaotic, really valuing and appreciating that. So I think that creatives often can come across like the risks they take can freak other people out sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think I wanted to share like an example related to the Actually Curious game that kind of brings that into context. It actually is almost like an example within an example. So, I lost 2 of my brothers, and I kind of lost my mind. And I decided that, actually, I can sense that my job is about to fire me after the second bereavement leave. And you kind of almost cursed, and I'm going to kind of almost curse too and say that I said, but you know what? Them. And I had, instead of anger, this desire to not lose energy to like anger towards someone else that's outside of my like phase 3 in my 5 phases, outside of my circle of control, but rather to imbue that anger into my purpose. And I decided I was going to rent a car. I was going to, hire a lawyer that was going to get the most severance from them as possible. And so park that over there in someone else's hands. And then I took my savings and I started driving around the country playing the game. Fast forward some like 4 months into this odyssey. You said it was a story, and I loved you saying that, because when I was writing it, it was more story than it was instructional, and it kind of turned into more instructional along that journey. And actually, just like days before lockdown, I was driving back from San Francisco, where I'd visited my nieces and nephews, who one of my brother Darren, the second one that lost, that's where they're at. And I was coming to Arizona, where I'd like set up this impromptu tour of sorts. So like all stuff, like I'm a pretty introverted person to begin with. And then I actually was alongside this healing journey. I was like, months into sobriety, and there was just like a lot of things that I was using this like continuous momentum of being on the road and popping up in places, talking about the game. You talk about community. I managed to, alongside one of the interns that helped make the original game, do a workshop at the University of Arizona. And we did a conversation circle, and everyone pulled a card from, I want to say, the happy hour edition. And the happy hour edition explores the things that makes us happy. That was the brief. And as we went around, I just kept getting surprised when these questions that we wrote, because we thought they would all bring up stories of happiness, they brought up feelings or even just like tears of like deep emotion. Questions like, what do I love most about myself? Instead of landing in the hands of like, the closet narcissist, it would fall in the hands of someone who had a really hard time talking about themselves. And it just opened my eyes that like you could have a perception or a reaction to a prompt that was meant to go one way, and another person could have a totally different one. And if you go into any situation, just looking at the nuance of reactions from physical to verbal throughout the room, you start to expand your aperture of awareness that even the simplest thing we might see differently. And I think in a way that's at the core. If that was something that we could all have compassion for, the risk of seeing a couple different perspectives outside and like quieting yours enough to do so, it would almost feel as though, we could have some real effect here in terms of the divisiveness issue that we set out to. But, maybe that's still dreaming.
But to your point, right? That's why you do this, right? If you dream it, you believe you can do it, make it reality. I'm going to shift the focus a little, because we always start this sessions off with mentioning AI and talking about sort of being human in this moment. But there's no way around, seeing that these tools, especially Gen AI, has just been adopted and inserted into every aspect of life. I mean, every program you open, it's got it now. Everybody's encouraged to use it in work. And have you seen it come up in your work? How have you sort of embraced it or not, in terms of talking about empathy, talking about this work that you do? Is there a place for it? What is it, if there is one?
Yeah, I've used it a lot. Sadly, we went from, in 2022, we received an investment from Pharrell Williams. We think we're headed towards our first 7-figure year, only to realize at the end of the year that we're 35% down in revenue. We had 6 people working for us at that point, and today it's me. It's me and AI, my buddy. I've been the beneficiary of like recent changes in technology when I was like young and a little bit cocky, and was just like, yep, now it's my time, And so like I can look at that person and also right now and say, okay, like it's time to kind of evolve and change. But I don't think that that's as easy for everyone, and I wouldn't call myself a early adopter for AI. I think empathy and innovation, if you look at it from an individual perspective, it might look like, okay, what is something that I really want to grow around? Am I a bit resistant to AI? Am I leaning a little bit more toward, hey, what, the scarcity side? What might that do to hurt me? Then what might it do for me? Then you could literally use this 5-step process to actually like tap the fear to evolve through it. And I think part of the reason why I said like I have this process for happiness up front is just that like I was just so trusting of like running through that 5 steps, because it takes me from what am I feeling, what am I resisting, into a process for mining that for wisdom, into like how do I then go outward into my community and ask for help. That's part of the risk too, is how am I willing to think that I deserve support and there's a network out there that's willing to do so. So I think like with AI, it hasn't been something that I've had to yet talk about a lot, but there's a direct link to the work that we do in empathy and taking a team from experimentation, crawl, walk, run, if you will, which is when you have the emotional makeup and you have the trust and vulnerability and conflict resolution skills to get into a change mode together and then find where it's breaking down quickly and navigate that together, then you're going to succeed. Do you have also the emotional makeup to say I might be on the outside of this organization's transition into AI, and do I want to be a bystander, or do I want to be what do I want to do with those emotions? Do I want to use it to learn? Do I want to change that narrative? I am a mandatory player here. There's so many more cards if you deal with the emotional part.
Thank you for that perspective. What I like is that you talk about, you have a process, it works, and you trust that process. And we do that in our work too. I mean, that's really, we come in and teach about how to, develop your creative capacity, and there's a process for it. And if you trust the process and you do it repeatedly, you get better at it and it's effective. And so I really like that, we bring up this topic, and rather than being sort of like parsing like, oh, the humanity of this software and does it have emotions or not, it's like, no, that's not what that's about. Right? Instead, it's about how do you respond to it? And like you said, you can come to it, that scarcity mindset, it's going to take my job. Or you can be like, well, what's going on in me? Because for me, it's interchangeable. AI, you could just supplant it with something else. The internet, remember when the internet was new? Or the whatever the next thing will be, right? There's always going to be something. And we can all just sort of freak out and, say the sky is falling. Or we can say, well, what do we do with this? So I like that way you spoke about it and how you sort of brought your tools to it. So this is, yeah. Would you please briefly, and again, we want people to buy your book, but briefly just list the steps
the 5 phases.
Yeah, I just realized we talked a lot about it, but we hadn't actually identified them.
Yeah, I mean, the 5 phases. Phase 1 is the language of feelings. And the key thing it teaches is actually tools that allow you to strengthen your somatic awareness. Your somatic awareness is your ability to feel your emotions and recognize your emotions as they show up as sensations in your body. And that is science. You actually will feel a sensation like tightness or heat or a loss of cognitive ability or tingling or something of this nature. You'll feel it before you can actually label your emotions. And it's really powerful when you start to experiment with that. It allows you to just bring in actually like another intelligence or even a sixth sense. And it's powerful for creativity. I think that for storytellers out there, we all know when it's good, right? But this actually helps us to put greater language and almost like greater process to when we know it's good. Like what actually, like I know what I feel like in my body. I know I see the physiological when I'm ready to say I'm good with that copy, if that makes sense. Phase 2 is living with intention. And really that is about values as an individual, values as an organization, and using that as lens to process your emotions through and to arrive at your decisions and make sure that your steps are in integrity. Phase 3 is channeling purpose. And I spoke a little bit about choice, and I really get frustrated with myself when I've wasted energy I want to be informed by outside influences, but I don't want to be whisked away by it. So this phase 3 is about how do you really make sure that your thoughts, your words, and your actions are in alignment with your values? How do you feed that circle of choice and expand your influence? Phase 4 is from empathy to impact. So, Micah, you so greatly high leveled it, but this is where we start to look outward. We don't exist in vacuums, and actually sometimes we are our biggest distractors. Some of those narratives that we have that we don't know to look at with a distant perspective in order to see, okay, I can change. But then, our families, our work ecosystems. I loved reading people talk about family and nature and their different diversions. But when you think about it, these are all, if you take that pizza pie, these are all places where our energy gets allocated. And I like to audit those spaces and places from time to time to see if they really are delivering on my purpose or my vision, my clearest vision as of today of what happiness looks like for me, right? As of today, right? That's why we run through it. And then finally, phase 5, which is living with abundance. And that's where we do that work of miracle creation. I find that like there are times where I'll have an idea, and even though I do this practice all the time, I don't realize all the different ways that I don't even believe in the idea or my ability to achieve it. Or maybe there's some healing still necessary. There's been a huge shift for me recently in terms of my recovery from holding space for through facilitation or even in like large public speaking. It would kind of take me out for days. And I would never have imagined how quickly I recovered. And in many ways that's a miracle too. But I think like there was also at one point a story that like that's just not me. That's like I'm an introvert and I will never, that is that person who does that. And I found my own different path. I'm still that person, but my own different path to feeling more full and recovered and just, yeah. That's the latest one that's just been blowing my mind. I'm like, wow, I can't believe I made that much of a shift in a few months just by like, honestly, just by loving myself, by really giving myself space for the things that are hard and the reasons why. Maybe even exploring the different stories throughout my past, like going back to like childhood and saying like, oh, actually, you know what? I didn't always have a hard time with this.
Yeah.
That's new. That's a new narrative too.
It's amazing that
So,
you can continue to discover that, right? You can still find this within yourself and learn these new things. It never ends. We're getting close to our end. I want to ask you 2 more relatively, hopefully short questions. One of which is, look, we call it the ROI of Creativity Summit. So we got to know, what is your take on this? What is the return on investment of creativity to you?
when I think about this, it's almost like creativity is almost the output, if you will, of taking risks, trusting yourself to take risk in an area, to play in an area, to almost like go from this is hard to this is easy. People see it and label it. They see it when it's all packaged and can call it creativity, but they don't see all of that comes to it. At the same time, it's very easy and sometimes cliche to say that everyone can be creative, right? And if you're really thoughtful and you're really loving and you know that person, you can show them. You can show them the examples, even though they might not label themselves creative, by which they're creative. They're creative problem solvers. They're creative organizers. They're creative under pressure. Yeah, I think that the return on risk, the return on innovation is creativity. And I really hope that especially in this season where soft skills and emotional intelligence and compassion and dare I say it, DEI are under attack, that people also realize that the byproduct of empathy for yourself, empathy for others is the ability to grow, the ability to innovate, and for other people to see it nicely packaged on the outside as creativity.
Yeah, well said. All right, the last thing is our creative sprint, which is our way of practicing creativity, is all about forming habits. And so what is, an example of a habit that you have cultivated in yourself that you'd like to share with others or encourage others to develop in themselves? Help us become empathy experts like you.
Yeah. You know what? Sorry, I'll just take one quick story on this, which is I wanted to be a rock star at one point in my life. One day I realized that in order to be a rock star, you got to do 100 dates across the country playing like 5 hits over and over again. And people don't realize how hard it is to be that repetitive with your own material, especially as someone who's very creative and wants to expand on different things. And it was just like this new appreciation I had for popular artists or performing artists in that way. So with that, I'm gonna start you guys at phase 1, and I'm gonna say check in. You know, I think starting to develop a practice around checking in with yourself, like one, it helps you to know what you're bringing in emotionally, helps you to kind of set some intentions for, you know, regardless of where you are, what you're doing, that you can be within your integrity at the end of the day, and almost like recalibrate to that most important thing of the day. But I think also as groups, I think as we get into habits of being willing to like slow it down, like get out of the task, get out of the outcome and say like, hey, hold on, let's check in for a moment. You know, there's so many ways if you want to build a habit, like, and fill your toolbox with ways that you can know your audience, read the audience, and check in. I think, you know, we both have created some amazing ones, but building that habit of checking in with yourself and then kind of modeling to groups what it's like to check in and get emotionally attuned together. Honestly, if I could pass one thing along and just hope it does the rest of its work, it would be that.
I love that. Yeah.
Check in with yourself today. Try checking in with the next group you're in today. I love that. And that there's so many ways to try that. It doesn't have to be really complicated either.
Yeah. Well, I was seeing Alexander talking about sort of the hard and accelerating time was a phrase he used in the chat. And I just think about how it's like a treadmill. We're just running. And so it seems it's such a simple thing to say, just take 1 second, stop and like pay attention. Like, what's going on? Is this what you want? Is this what you want your day to be about? Like, absolutely.
The plus and minus, Michael, you shared of being like, I had company of 6 people, and then you're like, now it's me and AI, like for better or worse, right? Like it's good and bad things about that. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Michael. This has been truly a joy to have you.
Yeah.
I feel very
Thank
grateful
you for your time
right now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, community, for sharing your energy live with us.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Really rich conversation. Yeah. And everyone, be sure you buy Michael's book, go to his website, get the card decks. I have them. They're very cool. So these are all great check-in questions and helping you build that capacity to do that with yourself and in groups, which is super important to have more people, as we call them, the creative instigators or empathy experts. Thank you again, Michael. Thank you, Noah.
Really appreciate you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, yo.
And thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. This conversation was recorded live at the 2025 ROI of Creativity Summit. Check out the video version on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. ROI of Creativity is brought to you by Another Limited Rebellion and Preview Media. Executive producer, Nikki Frankel, producer, Gina Bouchard, social director, Stevan Vlaschke, and our editors are Jasmine Jackson and Gina Bouchard.
And until next time, remember, creativity is a practice.